Welcome, everybody, to Denver Dzogchen. I'm here once again with Joe Wagner. I'm your host, Damien Abel. Today's episode has been brought to you by Future Alchemy, the other company that Joe has that is really awesome, that kind of brought me into connection with Joe, has a wide array of interesting herbs, substances, tantric implements, really cool stuff. You really need to just go check that out, futurealchemy.com. It speaks for itself. So go check that out. And today I thought, since we talked about faith and we've talked about kind of trust and surrender as part of the path, that a really other important piece of this puzzle is diligence, being psyched about the path, working hard. So that's the other part. There's this other power element and there's this self power element. And I really think we need both. And the diligence and being stoked about the path is kind of Joe's specialty, because if you ever join on a Tuesday night, you'll see that the enthusiasm is infectious, and that's really what keeps me coming every week. So you're the perfect person to talk about this subject, so I'll let you have at it.
Well, thank you, Damien, and hello, everyone. Happy to be back thinking about this stuff. For me, I mean, diligence is the key thing, right? If we aren't diligent, then we just wind up, everything is based on habits. And if we have habits that are non-dharmic, which is, almost all of our habits, and we want our life to be more dharma, then we need to change our perspective. We need to do something so that we can sort of file away at those non-dharmic habits and replace them with dharmic habits. In fact, Tulku Urgyen, who I know I'm always talking about him, but he's very important in my path. He said, even recognizing the ultimate reality, the view of Dzogchen, whatever you want to call that, is a habit. And right now we have the habit of not doing that. So we need to change that habit. How do we do it? Over and over and over. And for me, the support for that, because it's a lot of work and life is hard and we're all very busy, unless I think everybody is very busy. And we're busy with a lot of different things, a lot of which is important. Got to take care of family, got to take care of partner, got to make money, got to pay insurance, a million things. If you really want to have any time and have any energy, any likelihood of changing these non-dharmic habits of mind for dharmic ones, it seems you got to start someplace. And the place that I have started, and I feel so grateful that it hasn't yet abandoned me, is being enthusiastic. Being enthusiastic is a tool, and it's something we can work on and learn. And by practicing that and making that part of our personality, then we can apply it to anything that we have to do in our lives. And since my life is mostly about the Dharma, then I get to apply it to my life in the Dharma, which makes me extremely grateful to do. So it seems to me that enthusiasm and making that enthusiasm manifest in the form of consistency is really the way to move forward on the path.
That makes a lot of sense to me. When I first started in the path, I remember forcing myself to sit down and meditate for 45 minutes a day. And it was painful. And it was painful every day for a few years. I didn't quite know then or have the resources then that I have now. And one of the really freaking cool things about the Vajrayana is that there is so much to do, so many options, that you don't have to limit yourself to just sitting for 45 minutes and staring at a wall, especially if you're new to the path. You can explore the wide range. I eventually came up with this kind of philosophy. I am allowed to do whatever I want as long as it's Dharma. So I gave myself this kind of mental freedom.
I like
So
that.
like I can watch a YouTube video with a Dharma talk, or I can do walking meditation, or I can exercise with a bodhicitta motivation, or I can sit and meditate. But I didn't put myself into like, you must do this one thing. And sometimes when you read like the old masters or some of the older texts, there's a lot of lauding of do one practice and one practice only, and for some people that might be great, but for me that really would like kill my practice and enthusiasm. So by doing like a multitude of practices and pursuing different practices, without the idea that I'm like collecting anything, but more just finding a way to stay engaged, stay interested. Oh, that's fun. That's interesting. I want to try and accumulate that one. I want to try and accumulate that one. I want to try to study this, and let myself have a little bit of freedom to bounce around. Really opened the path up for me and made it so much more enjoyable.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I think this boils down to a way of looking at things that you can apply to any area of your life, whether it's negotiating for a better position at work or your own Dharma practice, is that oftentimes the person in the situation is not in the best position to figure out what to do next. And that's because we're so emotionally involved in everything. It's easier and maybe better, at least it's worked for me, to sometimes act like my own agent. Like if I was a professional baseball player, I would not be negotiating my own contracts, probably. I would have a professional doing that. Someone who is not, at least not as emotionally involved in the situation, and they would do the negotiation. Right? I would say what I wanted, and they would say this is what's likely, and then they would negotiate with the other side. In the same way, we want to change these deep habits. We need to act like our own agent. Our goal is to exit samsara, right? Now, whether that's during this life, which is the best, or at the moment of death, which is awesome, or in the bardo, or in a pure realm, the goal is the same for all practitioners of this path, and that's to exit samsara for the good of all beings, right? That's the whole message of the Buddha. At least this is how I see it. But how we do that and how we get there, we might not be in a position to know. We might feel like Milarepa some days, like all I want to do is go to a cave. But if we follow that, if we don't think it through and we follow that and we start selling stuff and trying to figure out which cave we're going to live in, it's not probably going to work. You know, it is better. Tulku Urgyen again here. He said, "Let go of samsara slowly." And I think this is a lot more effective than trying to make vast changes. You know, you get introduced to the path, you feel excited, you know, you feel like, wow, this is amazing. I can really know my own mind. I can respond in a more mature and beneficial way to my emotional troubles, and I can become just generally a better person in the world. And I can have deeper and deeper experiences of my own true nature in my practice. Wow, you might feel really psyched. You might want to give up everything to focus on that. But it doesn't last that long, right? I mean, in fact, the Tibetans, they have a saying about enthusiasm. They say, enthusiasm is as strong as a yak, but it's as short as a yak's tail, which is not very long. And so we have to be a little careful with that. But if we split off part of ourselves just for the sake of making appropriate decisions, and we say, like, what's the best way for me to approach this lifestyle of practice? That part of us, we can allow to look at the situation in a more prosaic way, in a less emotional way. And if we take that side's advice, then we can become a little bit more effective in our pursuit of our goal, which is accomplishment, you know, which is insight.
Yeah. I think something that reminds me of an important point that I learned eventually was that we can't let the idea of the perfect stop the good. So like one method that really worked for me was that Tulku Urgyen recommended is that you open your sadhana in the morning, do a little practice, mantra practice, and then kind of have your sadhana continue through your day and then close your sadhana at the end of the day. What that did for me was eventually led me to do what are called accomplishment retreats. So, you know, traditionally they would take a deity like Chenrezig and you would sit in retreat and do mantras until you had accumulated 100,000 mantras for each syllable of that mantra. So in this case, 600,000 mantras. And then you would do a fire puja at the end and to purify mistakes. And that was how you accomplish the deity. Well, I know, Joe, you've done this habit as well, where now, not a strict away, where I don't go into a cave or a retreat like in a strict sense. I'm still in my life, but I work to do those accomplishments of mantras of different sadhanas as part of my life. And it's not perfect. It's not as rigid and it's not as contained, and it takes a lot longer. But it keeps me moving forward. It keeps me in this mentality of I have an interest in this and I can dedicate myself to it. And it inspires me to like, oh, I want to accumulate some more today. So I'm always inspired to do more practice. That's been a really effective means for me to stay perpetually engaged in the path. And Nundro, before I did that, Nundro was the thing I was accomplishing before I started accomplishing different sadhanas. And people get scared of those ideas. But I think if you look at it like where you make your life your sadhana, and you're just going to keep accumulating different things, then you don't need to be in any rush and you don't need to like stress out about it. You can just stay psyched and practice one practice after another. And you'll notice after 10, 20 years that you've actually done something.
I think that's perfectly fair. I think it's important for practitioners generally to try to see that their life really begins when they wake up in the morning, and in a practical sense, it ends when you go to sleep at night. Now, of course, we're trying to do dream yoga and all sorts of things. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the time that we can actually be effective in our lives is from when we get up in the morning to when we go to sleep at night. During that time, there's not that much that you can do. Even if you were Milarepa, how many vase breaths can you hold? You know what I mean? It's not that much. It takes the pressure off. The main thing, it's like paddling a canoe across a lake. If you never paddle, you're not going, you're just going to drift around, right? And probably backwards since our habits are so strong. If you want to get across the lake, you need to put the paddle in the water. But you only need to put the paddle in the water once a day. That's okay. And as you do that more, you get in the habit of it. You get stronger, you feel more focused, you see the benefits more, you're moving through the water better. And then maybe you're going to paddle twice a day, which would be like, in this context, doing 2 sessions a day, so to speak. But in the beginning, you just need to dip that paddle in the water once, and that's okay. And for most practitioners, once you get that habit, and every day you meditate, then that happens without thinking. And then you have the opportunity to expand around that. Hey, I'm going to practice the mind trainings when I'm not in my formal session. And then that becomes a little bit of a session. Or, hey, before I go to bed, maybe I'm going to meditate 5 minutes. And the next thing you know, maybe I'm meditating a half an hour. The main thing is to dip that paddle every day and not to beat yourself up if you don't succeed, we have another day tomorrow. But by making that a real habit, then everything is possible. If you don't do that and there's just a sporadic sort of psychness doing this and doing that, which is not what you're saying, but many people might hear it that way, then you could be going around in circles. You need to be on the path, but you don't need to do everything in one day. We only have today. And today we can do whatever we can toward moving forward. That's the main thing. And if we steep ourselves in the lives of the masters, in reading Dharma stuff that's interesting to us, that's applicable to our situation, then we're more enthused to put that paddle in the water. And when we do that, we start to get better at it. Just like in the beginning, you don't even know how to quite hold the paddle. But after a while, you realize, oh, not too far out, or I'm going to be going left. Oh, not too far in, or I can't really get much strength there. You start to learn it, right? And as you get that, then more and more things are possible. Plus, you become a little bit of a refuge for others, in the sense that when you have a consistent practice, someone comes and says, well, what's big in your life? Meditation. I like to meditate. This is like, something that can be spread. And then we do a little bit of bodhisattva work in between our sessions too.
Yeah. Well, and the point, that's completely been my experience as well. Like, yeah, even if you just start with like 5 minutes a day, over time that will grow. But the seed I want to plant for people, because I remember that feeling. I want to be like Milarepa. And then feeling so discouraged that how far that seemed from my life. But now, as been practicing this for 20 years, I can tell you that, wait a minute, like now you're practicing 5-6 hours a day. It really is possible. And you can still be part of the world and still be married and have kids and have a full-time job and practice that much. It just takes time to develop that and slowly let go of those samsaric habits and slowly increase your dharmic habits. And you can find yourself way closer than I thought I would ever be able to do in this modern culture and world in terms of actual dedication to the path. It really is possible.
That's right. Yeah, I remember being in a group interview a long time ago, must have been 25 years ago, with Khandro Rinpoche. And she was making everyone say what their practice was and what they were doing. And someone complained about not having enough time. And she said, well, that's easy. You just need to get up earlier. And I thought, wow, that's such an easy fix on it, you know? And as you embrace these things as having real meaning for you in your life, not out of the pressure of someone, your guru, or Dharma friends telling you got to do X, Y, or Z, but your own love for it is allowed to grow, then getting up earlier becomes natural in this particular case, right? And I think it's important to say, just for our listeners who are probably a wide spectrum of people, that practicing 5 or 6 hours a day is not necessary or even possible for most people. But it's amazing how much more Dharma you can actually do when you start to embrace it as the most important thing. It's really about shuffling priorities, right? Right now, our priority is whatever, our job. And then Dharma might be on that list, but it might be number 17. And number 17 many days won't get met. But
Yeah,
if you every day you make you make aspirations, which are very powerful, and you try to organize your life a little bit, just so you have moved Dharma to the top position, so you can check that box, say first thing, which is the time most people should meditate, is the first thing in the morning because you don't have anything else going on, mind is clear, all that stuff. It becomes more and more natural to keep doing that. And it leaks out into all parts of your life, which is what we're really trying to do. We're not necessarily aiming to move to a cabin and abandon everything except sitting. That's right for some people, but not right for lots of other people. And we don't have the situation that the Tibetans have where, someone found to be living in a cave, they become an object of devotion. People want to support them. Here, that's not the case. So we kind of have to, again, be our own agent. I mean, like managing our enthusiasm, and so it doesn't create problems we can't get through. And in each day, just dipping that paddle, moving forward. And as you see how much progress you're making, maybe you want to dip the paddle a little more. That's what it's really about.
totally. Yeah, we're kind of discovering a whole what the Dharma is going to look like in the West still.
Mm.
Like it's still a baby thing here. And practitioners of the modern world are going to look different than practitioners of ancient Tibet or India. And I think that we have to be creative, and we have new tools as well as new obstacles. Like just recently I've been working on dream yoga practice, so I was able to change the wallpaper on my phone to have this question, am I dreaming? So that every time I look at this idiotic thing, which I do 100 times a day, I at least turn that into a practice. So there's even a whole range of skillful means that are newly available to us if we look creatively at, just even like our group, Denver Dzogchen, being able to meet once a week with people from all over the country, some of whom never met in person, us included, can have this whole relationship and sangha online. And so, yeah, in a lot of ways, the internet's kind of terrible. And I still feel nostalgic for time before it. But in other ways, we have new tools. We can receive teachings from teachers all over the world. We can participate in retreats. There's amazing things available to us as well as difficult things.
You're absolutely right. I mean, George Orwell, in my favorite book of his, which is The Road to Wigan Pier, he says something about this exact topic. He said, of course, some part of us is resisting modernity and newness, and just the same way of what you're saying. But he said, if you don't embrace, say, the bus, and you force yourself to walk, well, that's just like living in ye old tea shopper, which always made me laugh. We must embrace technology. We have to embrace the world. Otherwise, become an anachronism and an absurdity. And that's not inspiring to ourselves. It's not inspiring to others. But learning to work with things in a skillful way is that is the path. Right?
Yeah.
We don't need to cook over a fire. My Tibetan teachers, they cook over a dung fire in their stove in their house, which has no electricity. Now, that's right now, 2024. Do I need to replace my gas stove with a dung powered stove? No. In fact, they would actively encourage me not to do that. At the
Yeah.
same time, we do need to keep the lid, or at least we need to keep the brakes on some of these things, because things like the internet in a general sense, but things like Instagram can be extremely distracting. And even if you look into Dharma stuff, you have to be careful. So the discipline is important in the negative sense of like, I'm not going to do X. And it's important in the positive sense of I am going to do Y. I'm more of a Y type guy. But if you do enough Y, then you don't have to worry so much about X because you don't have any time. That's just how it is.
Yeah, because I find that worked better for me. Because when I was kind of X focused, I get real depressed and guilt comes easily to me, where I would just feel constantly like depressed about the fact that I would do things that wasting my time and I shouldn't be wasting my time. I found that not very productive for me, as you said, to stack on the good things and let that push out the bad things. To me, way more effective, because there's that thing too of like, don't think of a pink elephant. Like, of course, that's all you think about. So if you say don't do this, then all you think about is what you don't want to do.
Yeah, this has a lot to do with what the real meaning of renunciation is, which we can visit in another podcast. But it isn't so much about forcing yourself to give things up as about adopting things that are more conducive to the path.
Totally. And even our Instagram, if we're going to have it, we could cater it toward the Dharma. We can make sure that we're following Dharma things, and we can not follow so distractive, dopamine hitting things that are not conducive, which there's plenty of. So we can shift everything towards the Dharma slowly, slowly. So if we feel like I can't give up all these things, I can't give up Facebook and Instagram, and it's like, okay, well, then make sure that you're reading Dharma quotes. And when you have that post from a Dharma teacher come up, take a second and read it. And, maybe recognize the view or meditate for a minute before you go on to the next post. So we can insert it into everything we do and not feel so limited. And then, slowly over time, we might feel like, oh, I just don't even need that anymore. But
yeah, the interest in that stuff dies down to
yeah,
some degree. I mean, of course, it's that they're very sophisticated, and Instagram is a good example about getting you hooked in. So in some ways, better not to start. You can always delete the app. I did that recently, and hey, I haven't re-added it. That's been a little while now, a couple of weeks, and so eventually I might crack and do it. But
yeah.
I can always delete it again, and making little obstacles for falling into old patterns. This is just basic life stuff. Basic
Yep.
life.
And that's actually a great method, is if you have an app like that that kind of drives you nuts, is just delete it every day. Even if you upload it every day, it's going to make it harder and
Eventually you
longer.
might not upload it. You might be just too lazy. And then you can move forward. Our goal is not to be sitting like posts all the time. We must operate in the world, but we want to do it as skillfully and as beneficially as we can for both ourselves and others.
Yeah. So there's another thing you've talked about regularly as how you stay psyched, and that's about reading the lives of the masters. So I wonder if you want to say something about that. Maybe the Treasury of Lives website, which is a resource for
I
people.
think that's a great site. There's a lot of stuff online. Probably the best thing I know of online is Treasury of Lives. They've got all these incredible, but quite condensed and short biographies of great masters. And just seeing like, how did Khenpo Munsel, for instance, how did he actually live? And there's a little picture of that. And then, of course, there are longer biographies that have been translated, which I think everyone should read because it fills your head with thoughts of these great beings. And there is a blessing, whatever that really means, in just simply knowing about and calling upon these teachers, not even in a formal way. Simply uttering the name Milarepa will sometimes have deep effects on how I see the world and how I see myself and how I feel what this precious human body is really offering for me. And I think it's mostly about, I was about to say slowing down, which a lot of people have trouble with, but slowing down enough to just feel what we're feeling and try to allow those feelings to come up and pass. And then when we're putting new information into our stream of being, trying to make it associated with the Dharma. Most of the heroes that we have now are not particularly good heroes for us. And as a result, we tend to be really confused about how to live our lives. But there are lots of biographies out there. I personally have gotten a lot of benefit from reading them and just realizing these are real people. They have real problems just like I do. And they dealt with it in such and such a way. Maybe I can deal with my problems in a similar way, this kind of thing. I
Yep.
mean, this kind of being psyched is a two-part thing, right? On the one side, having good role models, dharmic role models is important. But the other side is really reflecting on the fact that nothing lasts and the fact that Emotions are pain. There's no way they're not. And learning at the same time, not being so negative and not being too crazy positive, but balancing those while realizing that it's all up to me whether I take the needle off the record or not. That's what the practice is really about. Pausing in my deepest core and allowing myself to not refocus, but end my complete attachment to and being caught up in the phenomenal world. Dharma is about letting go of that to at least some degree. And we got to practice that. You got to have those three, right? You have to have the right kind of role models, your own teachers, your Dharma friends, your Kalyana Mitras, and the lives of the masters. And you've got to have some of the sort of recognizing the negatives of samsara. If you never reflect on that, then you're not a Dharma practitioner, right? But those two alone are not, they're not anything, right? That just creates the space in which this real deep spaciousness can be allowed to arise over and over, which is what the practice is really about, at least from my perspective.
I had the great good fortune that my first Dharma teacher pressed me hard on the four thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma. And I think that that's often skipped over. And if people just spent enough time thinking about the suffering of samsara and the precious human birth, then they would find themselves finishing their nindro and doing all these things that they find so hard to do. If they just really truly contemplated how painful samsara is, and it's easy to pretend it's not, especially in the modern West in America. We're a relatively wealthy country. We have a lot of distractions. It can be, you can make yourself forget about suffering, but if you spend just a little bit of time thinking about all the suffering in this world and all the suffering that we'll each face as we face our deaths, as we face terminal illnesses, losses of our loved ones, we're going to go through all of those things. And if we think about them ahead of time, it'll be a little easier to face when we do, and we will have less regrets when we get there. I think it's so important to think about every day, the fact that we're going to die. As you said, you even thinking about going to bed at night as a death. We don't know if we're going to wake up the next day. And even if we do, we only have today in a lot of ways. So really letting that permeate us, I think, is so important. And one other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to connect with more was something about connecting with the lives of these masters. There's this concept in Tibetan Buddhism of mandala, like each deity or each master can have a mandala. And in some way, like you receive an empowerment or go to a teaching, you enter the mandala of that teacher or of that deity. And in so many ways, I think that we do, there's a mandala of everything, in the sense that if you pay attention to, Fox News, you enter the mandala of Fox News. Your life and mindset will be, those concerns, fears, interests. And if so, it's like this carefulness of what we intake. Do we have to be careful of what we eat, and we also have to be careful of what we ingest in terms of media, if we're ingesting the biographies of great masters, or if we're ingesting your average trash on Instagram, it's going to affect how we see the world and how we perform in our dharma path.
That's 100% true. I mean, for myself, I don't watch a lot of news. The news is really, this is a very loaded topic, so I don't want to get too into it, but at least managing the kind of stuff that's coming into your purview is, well, that's just, right livelihood, right life. If you don't do that, then you're carried away by incredible concerns over things that are real and serious, but over which you have exactly zero ability to affect the situation. And that can make you feel really worthless and powerless in a negative way. We are, of course, powerless over almost everything, and that is good to remember and recognize. But in some contexts, it can suck our energy out, and that's not very good. We need to empower ourselves in every possible way. Again, most of us don't live in a situation where the guru is like looking over our shoulder all the time. That's very rare now. In the old days in Tibet, in India, that was how it was. You lived with the teacher until you were the teacher. That's not the case now. So we have to, again, be our own Kalyana Mitra, not in an aggressive way, but we have to have a part of us that's sort of managing the situation. Hey, okay, I think you've had enough of the news for now. Let's do something else. And then practicing like this we can slowly amalgamate our lives, the time on the cushion with the time off the cushion, with our ideals of what we're shooting for, with our practical situation, and we become more and more adept at benefiting others while still moving ahead.
Yeah, I totally learned that lesson during COVID. I spent way too much time listening to NPR and just being mad and frustrated, and it didn't. And I look back at it now, and it didn't serve me one bit, and I didn't help society one bit because of it. And I just spent a lot more time angry and upset than was beneficial. And I could have spent that time more focused on improving myself on the path. So we can learn slowly, like these things just don't serve us, whether it's a distraction or an interest about which we have no control, like the news. We can stay generally informed about the world and have compassion for that situation, but to enter that mandala is not particularly useful.
Very useful way to look at it. I like that.
Yeah. So staying in our guru's mandala, staying in the mandala of our yidam, that is a huge part of that's what, like, you're allowed to do anything as long as it's dharma. That's staying in that mandala. So that for me is by setting those boundaries. We set boundaries a lot in our practice with visualization, etc. And those boundaries are not there to keep you in, there to keep bad stuff out. Right? It's to protect you so that you can walk this path and be successful. So I think that's a healthy way to look at it. It's like we set boundaries for ourselves to protect ourselves, and because we don't want to suffer more. That's all we're going
We
to
like
do.
suffering. Yeah.
We're sure addicted to it.
Be a cause of less suffering for ourselves and less suffering for others. Isn't that's really the whole path?
It really is. And so finding a way to stay engaged in the path and excited about it, I think is, as you've said, is really so powerful. And you have to find the things, and that's the thing too, like what we've talked about may not be the inspiring things for other people. For me, it was really like the magic and mystery. Like I was into UFOs and Bigfoot and stuff as a kid, and so all of that magic and mystery of Tibet kind of thing was a huge thing, and still is for me. I love the magical items and the stories of the siddhas and all of that. So for me, that's how I stay psyched, is staying connected to that childlike part of myself that keeps me really engaged. And I think everybody has to find their own things within the Dharma that's keep them hooked and inspired.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't quit looking.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And thank you, everybody, for being here again for this episode. And if you want to check us out, our website is denverdzogchen.com. There you can find out about our Tuesday night group and how to participate in that if that's something you're interested in. You can go over and check out Future Alchemy, where you can find some of these fun tantric substances and herbs and different things that can benefit you on your path. City Energetics, also, that's the Tibetan medicine. So if you need something to support you with anxiety or depression, there's medicines over there that can be greatly helpful. And other than that, I will see you next time, and thank you so much.
Thank you.